and welcome to an introduction to reading Navigraph charts. This is a tutorial for the Navigraph charts software, whether you're using Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, xPlane 12, or any other realistic flight simulator that tries to recreate the world faithfully with all the procedures and airports and whatnot. And so what we're going to do is take a look. Now, we're not looking at planning whole flights on this one. It would make the video far too long. We're just literally looking at the charts. Now, I'm going to zoom in on Heathrow because although it's a very busy airfield, it's actually relatively straightforward when it comes to charts. And so here we see it, Heathrow EGLL. This will form one of the videos that will become a series on approaches, but I realized that trying to teach an approach in the physical flying sense and looking at charts is just too much to do in one go. And so the first thing you'll notice, whether you're using Navigraph charts as a desktop, on your phone or a tablet, or indeed in the sim itself, is that you can now zoom all the way in and see individual taxiways and so on at all the airports and zoom all the way out. I like to like it in the globe view, but regardless. And so let's come in now to Heathrow and we'll take a look at the chart. So the first thing is to click. You just click where it actually has the name with the dot. And you need to be fairly precise also if you're using your finger. If you can't be that precise, if you hold the finger down just in the general area, you'll get a few options of different things in that area. You can also select it that way for those perhaps with sausage fingers or looking at it on a very small phone. Once you click on the airport, you get this information here. And what we're going to look at today are the charts. Again, if you're flying on VATSIM, you're going to be given the information on regards to which runway is in use, which departure to follow, which approach to follow, and all the rest of it. But we're just going to, we're going to make our own up. And so the first thing you will always want to look at, and I'm trying to think of an example where this wouldn't be the case, but I can't think of one, is to come over to the taxi tab. And then you're looking for the 10.9 page, all right? And it literally has the numbers 10-9. Now, all the others, bearing in mind this is real-world information from Jeppesen, there's so much stuff that just does not apply to a sim. So let's just, for argument's sake, if we take a look at this, engine ground running. Noise from ground running of aircraft engines is controlled in accordance with instructions issued by Heathrow Airport Limited. Okay, there is no way, as far as I can tell, that anybody in the sim is ever going to give a shit about you running engines and the fact that they make noise and that might upset somebody. Maybe in 20 years' time, the simulators will be at that level where you have to actually ring up a number and request permission from various things to do with British Airways maintenance and all the rest of it. And so it just doesn't apply. However, if we come down to the 10.9 page, as best I can tell, this is the first one that really does apply. And so taking a look here, it is a top-down view of the airport and it has some particular pieces of information that we require, and I'm just going to briefly go over those. The first is it will indicate all the runways of the airport. It will show you their numbering, in this case 09 left, also show you their heading. Now the heading is, will gradually change over time. That's the magnetic variation. And I believe these were more recently 090 degrees, so you can see a magnetic declination is currently on the way down in this part of the world. And so 089. So there's 09 left, here's 09 right. If we come to the middle of the airfield or some other suitable point, you can see exactly how long the runway is as well. In this case, 12,001 feet long. The northern runway ever so slightly longer. A few other pieces of key information. If we take a look at each end of the runway, you get the exact elevation at that particular point. In this case, on the near end of 09 right, we have 75 feet. Now, this is above mean sea level. If we come to the northern runway, we see it's 78 feet. If we come to the on end, 78, and over here, 77. So a very, very flat piece of land, unusually so. You don't often get an airport this big where all four corners of the airfield are literally within 3 feet, which is kind of insane if you think about it. You also see a basic outline of the terminal building. here Terminal 1, Terminal 2, Terminal 3, and so forth, Terminal 5, de-icing areas. And you'll see these little dotted lines at various points. These give you often pieces of information. So, for example, if you want to see in more detail what's in this dotted line, it says see page 10-9C. And so if you scroll down to 10.9C, here you see within that dotted area a more detailed view. Specifically, you're going to see the various individual stand numbers here. That would just be far too much information to include on this particular page. Trying to think anything else. Oh yeah, these areas here with the HS and the number, these are hotspot areas. What this means is, in real life, there is often congestion at these areas, and there'll be some procedure in place to try and alleviate that. Usually, it will say something like, you are not permitted to enter this area until you have permission from air traffic control or some such. So you can see here, hotspot area 1 links on the back end of this particular runway 27 right. You can see that links to a taxiway alpha that connects the two, and together with the maintenance area here. So obviously there is room for it to be particularly busy, and they've acknowledged that there. And so I think that's about it with regards to the map. One thing that I want to show before we move on, and I think we can rotate this. Yes, we can just here. Is you get some very important pieces of information. It's either along the top or along the side of the charts, just depends which way the airport's orientated as to how to be, what's the best way of doing it. Here we've got Heathrow. So we've got the name on the right, the country, the city, the UK, the name of the airfield. If we come over to the left-hand side, here we see the ICAO code, EGLL, always 4 letters. And then we see the more, I just want to call it user-friendly name. If you're in an airport, typically as a passenger, you'll see LHR on the time. You've got airport elevation, 83 feet. Notice it doesn't necessarily match the height of the runways, and that's because the height here is based off the center of the airport. And if we look carefully, sometimes you can find where it is. There is actually an exact point where everything is based on. I'm not going to waste your time trying to do a Where's Wally and find it, but there is literally an exact point that is basically identified as this is where the airport is. So if we come left, a few other bits up here, we've got the lat long here. Notice it's not particularly precise. It's the 5-digit, 6-digit standard, and that's because east-west there are more numbers than there are north to south. Don't ask me why, just is that way. So we've got the hours, minutes, degrees coming across, and again that's based from that point that sometimes, if you're parked at a certain stand, your coordinates will differ somewhat from this, and we'll take a look at that in a minute. On this particular row here, and again, we don't need to worry about things like when are these effective. And so in this case, 30th of September 2022. So that isn't that my Navigraph is out of date. What it's saying here is basically there was last a noteworthy change to these charts on the 30th of September, basically a year ago. And whether that was the magnetic declination or there was a new taxiway or whatever it was, that's when there was last a change. It's just so if you're looking at the charts on the regular and you look at that date, you basically know, oh, there's nothing noteworthy new for me to look at. If you see it's a recent date, you'll know, oh, there's been a change since I was last here, I best study it. And so, yeah, these boxes here, I know I've said it a couple of times, are frequencies that you will want to know. Now, something like this, the ATIS for departure, that's the weather, that's obviously hugely important. And so if you're getting ready to fly, no doubt about it, that will be the first frequency you want to dial in to find out what's what. Then you've got Heathrow delivery. Now, sometimes on VATSIMs, I've noticed these frequencies match identically. Other times they don't. Heathrow delivery, if somebody's doing that slot, they're basically checking your flight plan over, making sure it's all legit, and then saying, yeah, that's good. Get ready to depart on such and such. Contact ground when ready. Here is ground Notice there are a bunch of different frequencies. Very rare on VATSIM you're going to get more than one. If it's a big airport and they've got some sort of event on, you may, for example, get ground north and ground south or something like that. And again, then they're going to use the different frequencies. And then, of course, you've got the tower frequencies here. So everything you need to know is on that page for grounds. Now, I find that that is, probably the easiest chart to go with. Thankfully, it's also the first one. One thing I will point out, if you are flying older school aircraft, and I know that it's something that I like to do, you need to be a little bit more precise with your coordinates. And so, for example, we'll use this chart again, the 109C. If you come in here for parking stands, and let's just pick here, for argument's sake, we're on stand 329 on Pier 5. Well, what are the coordinates there? Well, you can try and fathom it out using the grid up here and down the side, but there's actually a much better way. And that is if we come over here to the parking stands, not really for the A380. So we're looking for parking stands terminal 3, stand 329. If we come over here, parking stands, these routes here in green are just literally where the 747-800 is authorized to taxi. Same over here for the Airbus A380. Clearly, being a big aircraft, they can't taxi everywhere. And interestingly enough, taxiway Alpha for this particular route is not part of where they're allowed to go. And again, it could just be that the wings get too close to whoever's on Bravo. If we take a look, let's carry on. Here we go. And so we've got the coordinates here for the stands. So the 109-E, and again, we were saying 329. And so here we've got the coordinates 51283, west 00277. And again, if you was to compare that with the airport, we can see here just by looking at the gate numbers, the coordinates vary depending on, even sometimes you get 2 or 3 gates together that are the same, and then the next 1 or 2 along change again. And so I think that is about it for the taxi page. So we'll come out of that. And so the next one you're going to want to know really is for departure. So we'll take a look at the SID here. It stands for, I think it's standard. Yeah, there we go. Standard instrument departure. Sometimes I say index departure. I don't know why or where I get that from, but standard instrument departure. And again, this is going to be something given to you if you're on VATSIM. But again, we're just going to do our own thing here. And so in large part, this will depend on the runway that you're on. Sometimes, 2 runways or more can share the same departure. If we take a look at these, it just so happens that all the departures out of Heathrow do not require RNAV. And we know that's the case because they do not have RNAV in the name. That is very unusual for such a large international, but it's just the way it is at Heathrow. For no other reason than I just want to show you what it looks like if there is one. Let's just briefly click here. EBX. Trust me to pick one that's too small. Let's try this one here. Brussels. Open charts. And so here we are, the SIDS again. And notice here we've got the LNO2K and it says RNAV. RNAV. And so what you need to know is if you're flying with an older aircraft, you cannot fly RNAV departures unless there's, some very specific addition been made to the aircraft. Certainly if you're flying VOR and stuff like that, you cannot do it. And so if you see RNAV in the name and you're in an old plane, forget about it. You've got to scroll down until you find one like this, the Civ 5 Charlie departure, that does not have RNAV in the name. But for now, we're back to Heathrow. So let's open the charts here on the SID. And I'm just going to pick the top one. In this case, the BPK 7 Fox and 7 Golf departure. And so if we click on it here, we get the information. And you can see here, these only apply for the runways that depart in a westerly direction. So the BPK 7 Fox and 7 Golf. I'll let you guess what the BPK 6 Juliet and 5 Kilo, which runways they will use if you bear in mind there are no other BPK departures. What does BPK stand for? Well, I happen to know it's Brookman's Park, but if you didn't know, if you take a look up here, you've got the names there as well. where are we here? And here we see it's named after the beacon here, the VOR beacon BPK, Brookmans Park 117.5. And so if you were talking on VATSIM, it's unlikely that they will say to you on the radio, the BPK 7F departure. It's more likely they will say to you, the Brookmans Park 7 Foxtrot departure. If they're typing it in chat, then they may well say BPK 7F just because it's shorter. Either way, we can see here they apply for both of these runways. Now it says here exactly what you need to do. Now, if you've got a more modern aircraft, so whether it's the PMDG 737, the Zebo 737 if you're an xPlane, whether it's the towless Airbuses, whether it's the Airbus, what is it now, by Phoenix in Microsoft Flight Simulator, you know, all of those, they will basically follow this departure for you. Providing you set the altitude window to 6,000 feet and you program it incorrectly and you either put it into managed mode if we're talking Airbus, you put it LNAV, VNAV if we're talking Boeing. And again, we'll take a look at this in a future video. But suffice to say, you know, it's a little bit beyond the scope because we're just looking at reading the chart. And so if we're on, notice here the 7 Fox and the 7 Golf, it literally applies depending on which of the two runways you're using. So 7 Fox in this case is the northerly runway, the 7 Golf is the southerly runway. From this, you can deduce which runway you are using without ever being told. Because what will happen is, very often, you'll be told when you're at gate, oh, expect the Brookmans Park 7 Foxtrot departure. Now, which runway are you using? Okay, you listen to ATIS, it may tell you which runway is being used, it may say which way the wind's blowing, but let's assume it doesn't. Brookmans Park 7 Fox departure can only be this runway, because this one down here is the 7 Golf, and if we take a look, 6 Juliet and 5 Kilo are actually, you know, they take you to the same place, Brookmans Park, but they're coming off the other runway, and often you will hear that. So, you know, if you say, oh, 7 Fox, don't think, oh, well, which runway though? You're told it in the name. Now, from Brookmans Park, you can see here you've got this sort of map view presentation of what goes on. So what actually does this mean? Well, you have here the initial instructions routing. So if we are to take 7 Fox, we see there the runway again, as if it were clear enough from this diagram. Climb straight ahead, intercept 297 degrees bearing towards BUR NDB by 4 miles London, D4, yeah? So once you're 4 miles away from London, which is this point here, and so you need to tune that into VOR, once you're 4 miles from there, you need to have intercepted a 297 bearing towards BUR NDB. Well, where's BUR? It's here, it's Burnham. And so this line here that we're following is on this heading, 297 degrees. And again, that's because that's what it says here. This is just putting into words what you see here. So again, when you're 4 miles from London, what this basically says is at 3 miles, start the turn. But when you're 4 miles away from this point, you need to be in line with this NDB beacon on a heading of 297 degrees. And if you're on the other runway, it's going to be the same 297, but notice here it has to take place when you're 3 miles away from London. So a slight difference depending on which runway you're using. And so you're going to follow this line then for a further 2 miles. Again, because we're on the northerly runway. So we're in line at this triangle here. We follow it for 2 miles. Clearly, now we're 6 miles away instead of 4 miles from London. Notice then we begin this right-hand turn. It's an arc. We don't wait until we reach this beacon and then begin the turn. We actually begin the turn beforehand. Notice then, once we complete the turn, we're to roll out on a heading of 053 and see here that there's this radial 304 degrees. So what that is saying is, after we complete this right-hand turn, and we're on a radial of 304. That means is if we was to stick a point in the sand here and map out a straight line 304 degrees, that would be this point here. Now, as we're flying through that point, we must be, and blue, unless you mess around with your settings, is always going to be height. What this means is you must be above 4,000 feet, and that's what's signified by this line below. And when there's a line above, that means you must be below, in this case, 6,000 feet. In other words, you need to be between 4,000 and 6,000 feet when you get to this point. You can't be any lower than 4, you can't be any higher than 6. Now, air traffic control could call you and override that restriction, and then obviously what they say applies as opposed to this. And if we take a look here, by the time it's 325, so the exact same thing again, we draw this imaginary line out. And these will be, by the way, individual waypoints on your departure. If you load this departure into an up-to-date, like we saw in the 737, the Airbus, you know, the whole host of other aircraft, they're just the two most popular, you will see these waypoints, and you will also see the restrictions alongside the waypoints. And so in this case, when you're 325 away, still no higher than 6, but we need to be above 5,000 feet. The next waypoint after that is a 3-mile distance to Chiltern NDB. How do we know it's an NDB versus a VOR? Because NDBs look like this, just a series of dots in a circle. VORs look like this. The difference between VOR and NDB is a VOR beacon. You can identify what heading the beacon is on and fly. You know, there's a few other differences. You often get a distance measuring equipment with a VOR. An NDB, you don't get that. You just get this arrow that points towards the beacon, but you get no clue how close or far away you are unless you basically fly alongside the beacon. And if the arrow spins around quick, you're close. If you're far away, it doesn't appear to be moving. Notice here the restriction at Chiltern. We've got the double lines, which means we need to be at or above 6,000 and at or below 6,000. In other words, it's 6,000, no ifs or buts. After that, it's 17 miles on a heading of 063, and we need to fly then directly to Brooklands Park. Now, in reality, you wouldn't cross Chiltern and then dial in 063 and then just hope you'd get to Brooklands Park. What you'd do is you'd cross Chiltern if you were flying this manually. You may initially turn 063 just to get the plane going in the right direction, and if you hadn't already, and you really should have, but if you hadn't already, or your plane was only capable of having one beacon in at a time and you'd had London in, you would then tune Brooklands Park, and then you would fly directly towards Brooklands Park on a radial of 243. So the radial is, the opposite of the heading that you would be really going on. Again, if you were at Brooklands Park and you were to follow this line out, this would be called the radial, and that is 243 degrees. Because we're heading towards Brooklands Park, it's actually 063 degrees. So they are the same thing. It just depends on which way round we're talking. And that there is the end. Notice again, Brooklands Park 6,000, no ifs or buts. And so that is a quick look at departure. Notice here that, and again, this is more for real world, if you lose communications, as in your radio broke. When I sat in cockpit, I did once hear an aircraft that had lost communications, and they were repeatedly trying to call it. And because I didn't sit in that many times, I mean, again, I'm talking, I maybe sat in no more than 10 times. The fact that I heard this once, to me, suggests it's not a 1 in a million occurrence. I don't know exactly how often it happens, but it's not 1 in a million. What they're saying here is comply with the route and altitude restrictions of the instrument departure. Average track mileage is 32 miles to Brooklands Park. And so all that means is if you're planning, whether it's fuel or for whatever other reason, what they're saying is, generally speaking, it's going to take you 32 miles to get from the runway until Brooklands Park. Clearly, if you're going to fly in a straight line to Brooklands Park, it's going to be a little less than 32 miles. Warning, due to interaction with other routes, do not climb above 6,000 until cleared. And warning, no turns below 590 feet. And so what that's saying is you can't just pull up, wheels off, and straight away roll the aircraft over in some dramatic air show type stunt. You can't actually make a turn until you're at least 590 feet, which is a very precise sounding altitude. But once we see that the airfield is almost 90 feet high in parts, it actually makes sense that they're probably meaning you have to be at least 500 feet above the ground before making the turn. And again, they're just rounding it up to 90. So that'll probably be just some restriction or some law that you can't bank airliners in any major way below 500 feet when you've got passengers in. Again, I'm sure somebody can put us right on that, but that is that. And so, yeah, there's the departure. And so now we're going to look at arrivals and approaches. And, if there's one thing that you take away from this video, it is that arrivals and approaches are not the same thing. Now, arrivals are known as stars, standard arrivals, and the approach just approach. And so if you ever mix up which way is which, just think star, arrival, and the arrivals take you down from the stars, and then the approach is, well, your final approach, all right? You never say, I'm on final arrival. You just say, I'm on final approach. Now, not every airport has an arrival. It's generally the bigger ones, the more busy. If you go to some small out-the-way place, it's very unlikely to have an arrival. So take a look back at Heathrow. What we'll see if we take a look at the charts, we'll come over to the stars page here. And again, I'm just going to pick the top one. And so this is great here, the Aliso 1 Hotel. Now, notice this is a very, as I would call this, a very simple, in that there's not many points. It's in a straight line and there's not many restrictions. But let's go through it. And so first to note, Aliso is the first waypoint. Notice it is not to scale. And so what that means, if we take a look at this line here, it's about as long as this line. Notice this line is 9.5 miles. This is to scale. This is not. And so 24 miles, if this really was to scale, would be somewhere, it wouldn't fit on the screen basically. It would be about 3 times as far away. Notice these, these 5-letter RNAV fixes will be in all the modern aircraft databases. Basically go from here to this point on a heading 314. They happen to be 24 miles away. Again, not something you need to worry about. The autopilot is just going to follow this on your behalf. Notice that there is a restriction at this one, ETVAX. And again, we've got the double lines, a flight level 180, which is 18,000 feet. Okay, so again, minor discrepancies, but there is. Notice here, there is also some information, and again, whether you're real life, VAT sim, whatever, pilots should plan for the possible descent clearance. Flight level 180 by ETVAX, flight level 70 by Big VOR. Actual descent clearance will be as directed by ATC. In other words, this is the plan, but obviously if you're not cleared down, you can't descend there. And you've got some other waypoints here. You've got another waypoint here. Notice this one, LLE01, has a speed restriction of 250 knots. So even though you may be above 10,000 feet, you cannot exceed 250 knots, max 250. Notice it's max 250, and so if you're at 240 or at 220 knots, that's fine. You just can't be above 250. Now, normally, aircraft are always going to fly airliners at the upper limit of what they're allowed to do. So in other words, it's a standard thing that when they're climbing, it's 250 knots until they're at 10,000. Then they'll nose down, they'll accelerate to whatever their best climb is, and then they'll go again. The same for descent. And when they come down, once they drop below 10,000 feet, the standard rule is 240 knots. And the reason it's 240 is that they have that 10-knot wiggle room should they need. So that's the standard thing. So when it says here max 250, you're generally not going to get somebody that's chuddering along at 200 knots, unless, of course, their aircraft is incapable of going faster. Notice here, this arrival ends at Biggin Hill. And again, this is crucial to understand the difference between the arrivals and the approach. The arrival will feed into the approach. And so this particular arrival ends at Biggin Hill, like we've said. Notice there are further restrictions here. Max speed 220. We've got the flight level 70, something that those Americans will We'll stare at in a gas because, of course, their flight levels don't begin until we're 180, and so they will never see this stateside. So that is 7,000 feet at Biggin Hill. And so following this in, you need to be at these heights. Now, it says here, warning, do not proceed beyond Big without ATC clearance. And again, whether it's VATSIM, real life, whatever. And so what would you do if you didn't? Well, you'd enter the hold, but there is also, and in my experience on VATSIM, there sometimes is a hold here, but they tell you to expect the hold and to enter the hold. And sometimes, I've been in it, there's like 5 or 6 planes stacked up, 1,000 feet between them when it's busy, and there's probably been occasions where there's been much more. Notice here we've got the instructions for the hold, and we can see here very clearly it's a right-hand hold. Notice the point is always at where the beacon is, whether it's NDB, VOR, or some other fix, it doesn't matter. And so in this case, the hold feeds in on 302 degrees. Notice it's not exactly the same as 316, it's ever so slightly offset. And what happens at the hold once we get to the VOR? We right hand 180 degrees, it's 122 degrees out. Notice this hold has a couple of restrictions. The maximum height is flight level 150 or 15,000 feet. The minimum height is flight level 70 or 7,000 feet. And so, you put 1,000 feet between them all, you can imagine you can have up to 8 aircraft stacked into that hold, worst case scenario. So you'd turn right if you were in the hold, and basically you'd get ATC every so often telling you to drop 1,000 feet. What you'd hear if there was like 5 aircraft is you'd hear a very quick succession of Speedbird 1 descend to 9,000 feet, Speedbird 2 descend down to 10,000 feet, Lufthansa Flight 3 descend to 11,000. You'd hear it like that very quick. So everybody would descend at the same time. And basically, once you drop down to 7,000 feet, you would be next to exit the hold. It's got to be careful how I say that, because it's very easy to say what and say exit all, and then somebody gets all dirty. But in any case, just because that Ali G thing, right? So there you go. So you're down there, 7,000 feet. Now, where do you go after this? Now, let's just assume that we're on the same runway. So we're expecting 27 right, for no other reason than, just to keep things simple. Now, if we come over to the approach side, let's first of all come over to 27 right. We'll go on to the ILS just because that's the straightforward. Notice here that 27 right, it begins over here. Now, on some approach charts, there will be a little more to it, but in this case, it isn't. The actual first waypoint is this particular one here, and it is 8.8 miles away from London. It's 7.5 miles away from IRR. What is IRR? Well, if we take a look, it is the ILS for our runway 27 right. Final approach course 269 degrees. There's the frequency 110-3-30, and there's the code IRR. In case you're wondering what is that in Morse, it's ... and if you press the button to hear your nav radios, you will actually hear that being broadcast over the radio frequency. You'll hear it like that, and that is how the aircraft. When you see the aircraft and it actually verifies IIR, you'll see it in somewhere on your navigation display or on your main display. The aircraft actually uses that Morse code to get those letters. So, and in real life, you have to confirm that before you go any further. But in any case, the point is, there is no way to get from where we just were, which is Biggin Hill or Biggin, to the final approach. Notice here we can see the airfield, and let's just assume the final approach began somewhere around here, I'm guessing. Notice there's no connection, and so we need a way to get from one to the other. Now, this is known in many cases as a transition, although on Heathrow they're calling it an initial approach. Now, notice there's a few different initials from Big, from BNN, from LAM, from OC, and so I'm just going to show these quickly. So here we go from Biggin Hill. So this is obviously where we are on our imaginary approach. There's the beacon. Notice here's the hold as well, because we may have been in that hold. And here is then the future instructions. Notice there are instructions not just for our runway, and again we are imagining that we're going to land on the northern runway here, facing west, in this case 10:30 as we've said, but they've also got the other runways on there as well. And so depending on which instructions you follow depends on which runway you are expecting. Now notice, just because we're coming from this way, let's assume we were coming from Germany way, it's likely that we would end up at Biggin Hill on our approach. But if we take a look at one of the other ones, here we see Bovingdon is a beacon VOR to the north. And again, this also feeds in to the final approach. And so here you can begin to see how different aircraft coming from different directions are filtered first on various arrivals that take them to these various VOR beacons, whether it's Bovingdon, whether it's Lambworth. Perhaps if you're from Norway, you would end up here at Lamborn. It says Lambworth, got Carvery on the brain. And then also over here, we've got Ockham. Perhaps if you're from France, you would end up at Ockham. Notice that all of these, again, feed to the various runways. And it may also be that ATC requests, you know, that all aircraft go via Big, no matter where they're coming from, just because it'll be easier for them then to keep track on the final approaches. And so Biggin, and again, we've got some information here with regards to how far we are expecting. So from runway 9 or left, it's 48 miles. If it's runway 27 right or left, it's more like 35. And again, that's just because if we are on the easterly runway, we've got to come all the way around here and then turn round on final, whereas if it's on the westerly, we've just got this little S-turn. Now again, I know I've been over this, but notice here we've got a restriction 9 miles away from Big. And again, this will be in the aircraft. We've got a maximum speed here of 180 knots. Now I think this 26 nautical miles refers to how far is left, roughly. And that's more if if you're flying and you're trying to figure out, well, we're this high, we're this fast. In other words, we've got so much energy to lose. We've got 26 nautical miles to do it in. Now, as we get to this point, 9 miles from Big, we start this right-hand turn. Notice there is this restriction here for a minimum holding level, and that is based off an invisible waypoint that, again, this one here is the start of the turn. This invisible waypoint is on a 277-degree bearing from the beacon. And in practical terms, you can see that's very, very close indeed. Minimum holding level, well, what on earth is that? There isn't actually a number for the minimum holding level. And that's because minimum holding level is something that will be assigned to you depending on the day. Here we go. Minimum holding level, flight level equivalent of 7,000 feet, is above TA and will be allocated by ATC. In other words, one day it may be 7,000 feet, another day it may be 6,800, whatever. You will be told what that is. And again, if you're flying for yourself, we can just ignore that. If we're trying to be realistic, this will be the first one that we really care about. Notice there is a line below. And so what this means is we need to be 6,000 feet or above at this particular point. And again, it's based off the VOR beacon here on a 293-degree radial. Notice this right-hand turn, it doesn't really care how tight you do the turn. I mean, obviously, you don't want to be so loose you circle over the airfield, but they're more concerned with the angles here, and that's because as all aircraft are at maximum speed of 180 knots and they do a right-hand turn, exactly where they roll out is always going to be within a couple of hundred yards of one another anyway, big or small. And so, that's why there's no very precise XY coordinate. It's all, in this case, based off distances and bearings. Notice here there is, after we roll out, we're on to be a heading of 091 degrees. Notice that is the reciprocal of the final approach, which we've already discussed previously when we looked at the airport charts. Coming this way, 301 degrees from the beacon, we to begin our left-hand turn. Notice there they're saying there's about 17 miles to go. And here the two paths diverge now, depending on whether we're landing on 27 right or 27 left. And again, we've got a few height restrictions here. Notice that this particular restriction is distance 9 from Big, and again, Big and Hill being down here. And so if you draw an arc 9 miles away, as you cross through that arc, you are to be at 3,500 feet or higher. Now you may say, well, could I be at 10,000 feet? No. Why couldn't you be at 10,000 feet? And the answer is because there was previously a restriction for the minimum holding level. Notice this, no higher, no lower. In other words, if that minimum holding restriction, for argument's sake, was 7,000 feet, let's just assume 7,000, you could be above it here because it's 6,000 or above, and you could also be above it here because it's 3,500 above. In other words, you could legitimately still be at 7,000 feet here. However, the very next waypoint is no ifs or buts 3,000 feet. So if you can get down from 7,000 to 3,000 without breaking any of the other restrictions, in theory, you would be able to do that. Although I don't think there is an airliner capable of doing such a feat in such a short move, but maybe you're in a jet fighter or you can, I don't know, there's some way of doing it. In theory, you could. And so again, we're focusing on the northern runway. Notice here this fix, we're to be 3,000 feet, no questions about it, on a heading of 270 degrees. And notice the distance is 10 nautical miles exactly from IRR. And again, we've been over that. That is the ILS. And then notice the next waypoint, 2.5 miles further, we're to be 2,500 feet, no ifs or buts, at 7.5 miles away. Makes sense, yeah. If we're at 7.5 here, and we've traveled 2.5 miles since the previous waypoint, makes sense, that would be 10 miles. And so this point here, the initial approach, then feeds on to the final approach. So now if we come to 27 right, notice this point, 7.5 nautical miles, 2,500 feet. And so now we come to the ILS, notice this, 7.5 miles IRR. And if we take a look down here, 2,500 feet. Begin to see how it all starts to fit together like a very nice and neat jigsaw puzzle. There is no wiggle room whatsoever here. It is all planned right down to the last foot. And so this brings us nicely onto their final approach charts. Now, again, just like some of the others, we'll take a look at this just before. I realized we didn't do this for the start, but there is more information on the approach. We've got a few important frequencies up here that we need to know about with regards to who to talk to. Notice here we have the frequency that we need. So this is the ILS code. Again, Airbus dials this in automatically. Boeing, you need to do it yourself. There's the code that you need to identify, in this case, IRR. Here we've got the final approach course, 269 degrees. And here is the final approach fix. What is the final approach fix? Also known as the FAF. And all that basically is the waypoint that we get there, in this case the 7.5, which also forms the start of the final approach down, the glide slope so-called. And so that is that one there. It's just basically giving you the name of the last waypoint or the identifier. In this case, our waypoint doesn't actually have a name per se. Sometimes it will have a 5-letter name. In this case, it doesn't, but it is 7.5 miles away from the ILS at 2,500 feet. In other words, this is a very precise position in 3D space. You've got the distance from the ILS, which we're in line at 2,500 feet, which is the height. Here we've got different capabilities of the ILS. So we've got Category 1 and Category 2 and Category 3A and Category 3B. I can't remember exactly what all of those are, but basically Category 1 is the minimum, so the lowest demands on plane and aircrew. Category 3B is the highest, and so if it's the thickest of fog and you can't see jack shit, it's a Category 3B approach. And for that, the aircrew needs to be trained, the aircraft needs to be certified, and basically as you deteriorate from 3B to 3A, there's a little less fog, whatever. Category 2, I think you have to Category 1 usually is you have to see the runway from 200 feet up. Category 2 is 100 feet. Category 3A is 50. And then 3B, I think you don't need to see anything. I think, again, someone can perhaps correct on that if I'm wrong. Airport elevation, again, we've been over that with regards to the taxi page. But if you are arriving at Heathrow from elsewhere, certainly if you're in the Boeing, you need to tell the Boeing what the pressure it can expect when, so it matches the pressure within the cabin with the outside air. If you're in Airbus, again, it generally takes care of it for you. Here we've got an MSA chart. So MSA just stands for the minimum safe altitude, and it is always centered on or around, let's say, 25-mile radius. So from the center to the edge of the circle is always 25 miles unless it says otherwise. And this chart is actually centered on the London VOR. So sometimes it's centered on the airfield, sometimes something else, and in this case it is the something else London VOR. And so it's centered upon, here we see London VOR, the beacon here. Notice slightly to the north of the airfield, but again, still very close. And so what this MSA means is anywhere within 25 miles of the airport, if you're flying at 2,200 feet, you will be safe. You will not hit a hill. You will not hit any radio mast. You will not hit any radio mast on the top of a building that is placed on top of that hill. And not only will you be safe from it, you will have a safe margin of error. Now, I believe that margin of error is 1,000 feet. So theoretically, you could fly at 1,200 feet and still miss everything, although things may get a bit hairy. Don't quote me on that, but there's the MSA. Now, so, in real life legal, you would have to fly 2,200 feet or above to be safe within margins of error. Notice, though, down here is 2,100. On some airports, you will see more pieces to the pie and or in different directions. If you are landing at an airfield that's got a lot of hills on one side and sea on the other, you may see, a line that basically runs, well, whichever way, but let's just say north-south for simplicity. And on one side, you may see like 2,000 feet. On the other side, it may say 10,000 feet. And it's just to make it very easy which side is the safe side when it comes to terrain. And so if you're coming in and it's thick fog, whatever, you can't see anything, one glance at this, if your altitude reads 2,500 feet and you're within 25 miles of London VOR, you know there is no risk of hitting any building or structure or otherwise. And again, by using these radials here, you can deduce, well, if I'm coming from the northwest quadrant, then it's 2,100 feet. If I'm anywhere else, if I'm northwest quadrant, it's 2,200. Anywhere else, it's 2,100. And so, if you're following procedure, this will not apply. And what I mean by that is if you're following procedures, they already take into account the minimum, so you don't need to worry about it. If you are deviated off your procedures or you're not on a procedure, clearly this begins to matter an awful lot. Also, just for situational awareness, if you're following a procedure and ATC says go around or something like that, it is helpful to know, especially again, on this, it's basically the same no matter where. But if you've got like 8,000 on one side and 2,000 on the other, clearly which way you turn is going to be massively influenced by that. Speaking of missed approaches, that is the next chart here. And again, it tells you in text form what to do. And so bearing in mind, we're on approach for 27 right here. Missed approach, whether it's because you're at minimums and you can't see the runway, whether it's for some other reason, you've got an unsafe gear light, you've got to go around, or ATC tells you to go around. I can't imagine any other reasons you'd go. Unstable approach, clearly. Climb straight ahead, and when passing 1,580 feet, all your distance is 0 from IRR. Remember, that's the ILS here. IIR. And so when passing, let's just call it 1,600, or you're, let's just say, right over the ILS beacon, whichever is later. So in other words, it needs both of these things to occur. Then start your right-hand climbing turn. So in other words, keep climbing and start a right-hand turn onto track 316. So turn right into a northwesterly direction and continue climbing until 3,000 feet. Then, as directed, in the event of a radio failure, see another page. And so in other words, if we miss, we turn right after both passing 1,580 feet and be a distance of 00 from IR. Now, based on where this dotted line is, I can only imagine that the IR is somewhere around here. Here we see 05, so IR may be about here, 00. But we also need to climb above 1,580 feet before commencing that right-hand turn. By the way, there is that 80 feet figure again, which again, I can only assume if we see airport elevation is 83 feet, that's why there's that 80 feet. In other words, it's 1,500 feet above the ground, let's call it. Excuse me. And so we start the right turn onto a track of 316, and that's signified by this dotted line. And again, based on how long it takes you to climb, you may be here or you may be over here where my mouse is. If it takes you a lot longer to climb, you may be here. But either way, you're on a 316 degree, and they were waiting, ATC, Speedbird 5153, missed approach 27 right, we're climbing onto track 316 degrees, awaiting further instruction or something to that effect. Usually they would see that you've missed, because obviously they're looking out the window, they've got their radar, and they would get onto you. They probably want to know why that you went round, and then they would set you up for another approach. Taking a look further on then, so outset HPA, runway elevation here 3 HPA. So first of all, HPA. So this is the difference between the US mode where they say altimeter 2992 and the UK methods and other places where they say QNH whatever. And so this is basically saying HPA mode, which is the QNH mode. Runway elevation 3 HPA. Again, not something that's normally used, but so it's more done in Russia for whatever reason. They sometimes set the altimeters not to 0 based on the sea level, but based on the height of the runway. And so if you're trying to do that for whatever reason, the information's there. Transition level is, in this case, set by ATC. So all that means is, when do you change from 3,000 feet, 4,000 feet, 5,000 feet, up to flight level 40, flight level 50, and so on. And again, in this case, it is set by ATC. And so what that usually means is, based on the air pressure of the day, if the air pressure is, let's say, quite close to standard, they may say, 7,000 feet or whatever. But let's say there's a big deviation in the pressure for whatever reason. They may reduce that height just so they can be a little bit more precise. And again, the exact figure set by ATC. If, again, you're flying by yourself and it's not set by ATC, just go with the standard, which in this case is 6,000 feet, the transition altitude. And so if you are taking off, once you reach transition out 6,000 feet, you would then switch over, in theory, to standard pressure, and you would no longer be at, quote, 6,000 feet. You would now be at flight level 60. And again, I realize it's beyond the scope of this tutorial to explain all the differences between them, but basically, in a nutshell, you knock off the last 2 zeros and you're at your flight levels. Again, it's based on deconflicting aircraft, different airports, and alleviating aircrew workload by not having to constantly change the pressure when they're not actively arriving at a specific airfield. So here we see the information top down, and again, the first waypoint there, we see it's a straight line because it's an ILS, which is always a straight line. And usually they line up precisely with the runway, as they do here for an autoland. There is a couple of examples where the localizer, which is the steering bit of the ILS, doesn't always line up with the runway. Usually it's because there's some obstacle or whatever. If that is the case, it very clearly states that it is an offset approach. Perhaps the most famous example of all time was that airfield that's now shut in Hong Kong, I believe, where they would come down and approach, and then on the last minute there'd be like a 45-degree turn to final. That was kind of unusual, and it's not surprising that they did close that approach down, but that's one such example. Again, here we've got the final approach. I realize we've been over this, the frequency, the code, together with the Morse code. Notice here there's some notes, and it's note 1 for the ILS, so usually you will see a number 1 somewhere drawn on the map. I'm trying to find it, probably can't see the wood for the trees. But in any case, aircraft unable to receive distance measuring equipment. So it's maybe somewhere near the DME. Anyway, I'm not going to waste your time or mine trying to look for it. But in any case, aircraft unable to receive DME advise ATC. So again, DME, just a fancy way of saying distance measuring equipment, which is just a fancy way of saying can measure how far away the beacon is. So in other words, if your plane can't measure how far away this ILS beacon is, then you need to advise ATC, reasons being that a lot of your restrictions are based off this distance. And then they're basically going to provide you, and it says it here, they're going to tell you when you're 7.5 miles away so that you know you need to be, in this case, 2,500 feet. Then they're also going to update you when you are 4 miles away, which is the next restriction, because by then you need to be, in this case, by here. So it's just an information thing. And again, if you're following the ILS, you're going to be flying down the beacon anyway. They're just going to advise you how far you are away. No, its localizer is not available without the ILS DME. And ILS DME reads 0 at runway 27 right threshold. So what that means is when you're on the piano keys, which is the threshold, you know, the white striped lines at the beginning of the runway, at that point, the ILS distance will read 0. So it won't actually read 0 at the far end or halfway down the middle, rather, or even at the lights at the beginning, but it's at the piano keys. And so last but not least, I realize it's been a long video. I'll try and get it under an hour. We've got here some other bits of information. And so following the procedure in at so many miles, 765,432, we are to be at the following heights, 450, 77, 10, 19, and so on. And again, and this is if the glide slope is out. So if you've got steering guidance, and you know that's the lateral, that's the left, right. What they're saying is if you don't have, you know, and this is never really going to happen in the sim, but perhaps there's an aircraft that will simulate a glide slope failure. You would then need to manually make sure that you aim for these particular heights. So if you're at 4 miles away, you should be at 1,400 feet, but let's say the pilot monitoring says you're at 1,300 feet, and so you're slightly low. What I would say to you is, well, I need to pull up a little bit so that when he says 3 miles and 1,090 or 1,100 feet is more likely, that, you know, you're getting it, the trending the right way. And then last but not least here, we've got this vertical profile. So this is like a side view. This thick bar here is the runway. This M here is your missed approach point, so which will also coincide or may coincide with minimums. It's not always, but you've got distance here of 0.5 nautical miles for the ILS. And again, if you are aware that things are not panning out, you must go around at the missed approach points. Clearly, if you're on the minimums are down to 50 feet because it's thick fog, and you get in with 0.5 miles, but at 50 feet, which let's say you're quarter of a mile, you still don't see it. At that point, you go around. Clearly, the missed approach points is going to move slightly, but generally, if it's visual conditions and you can see that things aren't right, plane on the runway, whatever, you must go around at that point. One other thing to note here, you've got the GS, which is the glide slope. This is standard 3 degrees. Sometimes it will be slightly more, sometimes slightly less. London City is famous for having a high glide slope. I think it's something like 5 degrees. That's unusually high. Very rarely you'll get slightly more shallower, 2.5 degrees, 2.9. Sometimes you'll see 3.1 or 3.06, but usually it's a 3 degree final approach. And all that means is from 7.5 miles away at 2,500 feet. The ILS will be exactly 3 degrees from that point until reaching the runway. Here you've just got different miles, so obviously 0.5 plus 0.5 makes 1 mile, the distance there to IRR. Notice here, they reckon it should be 450 feet. Here, the next one, 2 miles, so 2 miles plus the 1 mile up there clearly makes 3 miles, and there is to be 10,090 feet. This is actually a restriction at this particular one, so what they're saying is that between 3 and 4 miles, you should never go below 10,090 feet. And, there's going to be various, buildings, trees, fences, goodness knows what other reasons for that. So that's actually a restriction. Notice if you're following the glide path down, it takes you very close to that restriction, but doesn't actually bust it. And so, yeah, those are the pieces of information there. And again, these are the individual distances at the underneath. And you've got the cumulative distances there at the top. This information here, so here we've got the glide slope. All this is a very quick, dirty way for you to see how many feet a minute you need to be descending. So in other words, if you're doing a final approach speed of 180 knots ground, so across the ground, then you need to be descending at 955 feet a minute. And so again, it's just a very quick way that if you're there and you've got some sort of failure with the glide slope or whatever, and you know that you're doing 160 feet across the ground, you would set your vertical speed to 850 feet, because of course you can't set to 849, and you would know based on that you're going to be very close. Now, if you're doing 150 knots, clearly there is no. You can see, well, at 140, it's more like 750. 160, it's more like 850. Don't take a genius to figure out at 150 speed, it's going to be something like 800 feet a minute vertical descent. This here is just to do with the lighting of the airfield. So you've got your PAPIs on the left side of the runway, and the high ILS. This stands for your high intensity airport lighting system, I guess Mark II, which is just, basically how many lights, how bright. There's obviously a standard to it. People don't just randomly strew lights out in front of the runway. This here is just a very quick way to look at missed approach. So if in the heat of the moment, you don't have time to read all the missed approach stuff there, you could just look down here, and what this is saying is straight ahead to 1,580 feet and or 0 miles. Sorry, it's straight ahead and this. So both of these, because it's whichever later, so you need to be both at 1,580 and 0 miles away from the ILS, then a right turn onto 316 degrees. Again, this is just a very quick sort of same way of saying this up here that you can interpret in the heat of the moment. And then this very will be the last thing here, the minimums. And so based on what type of aircraft that you are at, and the category determines your minimum. So remember, we were saying the category 1 is the lowest of the, the least of the criteria. So this will have the highest height because it's the least strict, so to say. And you've got two numbers. You've got one in bold, one in not. So the bold one is above sea level. So the altitude of 278 feet, which is 200 feet height being above the ground. So if you're 278 feet above sea level, which is also the same as being 200 feet above the ground. Now, most aircraft have a radio altimeter, which means you would set this one, the 200 feet, as your minimums. And what it's saying is, if you cannot see the runway at that point, you would have to go missed. That is what the minimums is all about. And again, you've got different restrictions down here based on weather, visibility, and so on. And again, that's beyond the scope of this, but basically if it's foggy and you can't see the runway and all the rest of it, go around. Now, if it's a category 2, obviously this is a more advanced version of the ILS system. You've got a lower height here. And again, 178 feet above the sea level, or 100 feet radio altimeters. And so you could argue it's twice as good as 200. And again, if you still don't see the runway, which includes lights, obviously go around. Now, category 3A is the next one. Notice this is now 50 feet. This is decision height again, so there's no altitude this time. It's just based on the radio And so if your plane knows it's 50 feet because it's got a radio altimeter above the ground and you can't see the runway, you've got to go missed and notice for Cat 3B, there is no height. And again, because in theory, I think you can download in fog where literally you couldn't see your hand in front of your face and the aircraft is capable of doing it. Again, I think technically it's saying there should be a 75-meter visibility. I'm not sure what that is. Notice here it says C and D. On all that the difference is there, notice for all the ILS there's actually no difference, but C, is going to be your 737s, your Airbus A320s, all of that. Your Category Ds are your bigger, so your 747s are going to come in as Category D. And if we notice over here, there's a circle to land bit. Now, I can't think of any reason why there would be a circle to land at Heathrow. But let's just assume for whatever reason they're having a circle to land. Some airports, circle to land is a regular thing. Certainly if there's a hill at one end that prevents a normal approach. Notice here, the Category C, so your 737 style aircraft, have a maximum speed of 180 knots. Your Category D have a maximum speed of 205, so they can go a bit faster. Notice here that the height is the same, the restrictions, although the 737 requires less visibility. So in other words, if there's 3,000 meters visibility, the 737 will still be allowed to do a circle to land at this particular airfield, 2,400 meters, but the Boeing 747 or any other Category D aircraft will not, because look, 3,600. And obviously, again, all these numbers will vary airfield to airfield. And so I hope you found that video informative. I realize we've bust through the hour by 6 minutes, but that is going to be it from me here on Internet Flight Rules as an introduction to reading the charts. In a future video, we'll actually take a look at making it work. So until next time, take care. Bye-bye. See ya.